I decided I would be the comic that you could look at immediately and tell they're terrible, they would never make it ever.
Imagine being told no on the biggest stage of your life, and then, just months later, creating a character so bizarre, so unforgettable, that it turned you into a legend overnight. This is the untold story of how Paul Reubens transformed rejection into one of the greatest comebacks in entertainment history. Imagine pouring your entire soul into one audition, believing it would be the turning point of your career, only to be told, flat out, you weren't good enough. That was Paul Reubens in 1980, standing on the stage of Saturday Night Live auditions. He had spent years training with the legendary comedy troupe The Groundlings, sharpening his timing, building characters, and crafting a unique voice in the world of comedy. By all accounts, he thought he was ready. But when the cast list came out, his name wasn't there. Instead, someone else, an actor he barely knew, got the spot he desperately wanted. That actor's name was Gilbert Gottfried. The rejection crushed him. Reubens wasn't just disappointed, he was furious. For years, he would admit that he never got over that sting. But rather than let the anger eat him alive, he funneled it into creativity. His friends at the Groundlings remembered him pacing, frustrated, insisting that he was going to create something so bizarre, so unforgettable, that Saturday Night Live would regret passing him up. The irony is, they would. Reubens realized something powerful in that moment. The traditional path wasn't built for him. He didn't fit the mold of the slick, polished comedians that Lorne Michaels often favored. He wasn't the next Chevy Chase or Bill Murray, and that was exactly his strength. Instead of imitating what was working, Reubens made a decision that would change everything. He was going to build a character that didn't just break the rules, it shredded them. But here's the shocking part most people don't know. Pee Wee Herman wasn't originally a plan for stardom. He started as a parody, a send-up of those awkward, overly cheerful hosts of low-budget children's shows. Reubens designed Pee Wee to be ridiculous, almost uncomfortable, the kind of character you laugh at because he's so out of place. He gave him a strange, squeaky voice, a tiny gray suit that looked a size too small, and that bizarre laugh that seemed half joyful, half sinister. On paper, Pee Wee was a joke, but in practice, he became lightning in a bottle. Still, in 1980, this was all just forming in Reubens's head. He didn't yet know if Pee Wee could work in front of an audience. He didn't know if anyone outside the Groundlings would even understand the humor. But one thing was certain: Paul Reubens refused to fade into the background. If Saturday Night Live didn't want him, he was going to build his own stage, his own world, and force people to pay attention. And that decision, born out of rejection and anger, would set the stage for a single midnight performance that would shock Los Angeles, ignite a cult following, and change comedy forever. But how did this strange, childlike character actually come to life? The answer lies in the late nights, where Paul Reubens started piecing together the identity of Pee Wee Herman. And once you hear how Pee Wee was born, you'll understand why the world couldn't look away. What does a rejected comedian do when the biggest sketch show in America slams the door in his face? For Paul Reubens, the answer was simple: invent a character so odd, so unforgettable, that the world couldn't ignore him. Late at night, in smoky rehearsal rooms with his Groundlings peers, Reubens began tinkering with an idea, a parody of every awkward, over-the-top kids show host he had ever seen growing up. He wanted to take the forced smiles, the exaggerated cheer, the childish innocence of television hosts, and twist them into something bizarre, exaggerated, and just a little unsettling. That experiment became Pee Wee Herman. At first, Pee Wee was almost a throwaway. Reubens didn't think of him as a star. He was just a goofy bit for sketch comedy, a character meant to lampoon bad TV. The squeaky nasal voice was intentionally irritating. The tiny gray suit, paired with a skinny red bow tie, made him look like a boy trapped in a man's body. And the laugh, half giggle, half cackle, was designed to make audiences squirm as much as they laughed. But the more Reubens played with Pee Wee, the more he realized this parody had layers. Pee Wee wasn't just a joke, he was magnetic. The character developed quirks nobody expected. Pee Wee loved toys, but in a way that felt obsessive. He was polite one second and bratty the next, bouncing between childlike innocence and mischievous chaos. He wasn't cool, he wasn't heroic. He was weird, needy, and somehow lovable all at once. And that's what made him different. Comedy characters of the time were snarky, snarky or clever. Pee-wee was neither. He was surreal, a cartoon brought to life. But here's what most people don't know. Pee-wee's name came from real life. Paul Reubens owned a tiny Pee-wee brand harmonica, and Herman was just a funny-sounding surname he picked out of thin air. Combined, the name sounded like the kind of goofy nobody you might meet at school. Ordinary, unthreatening, and almost pathetic. And yet, once Reubens put on that suit and slipped into the voice, Pee-wee Herman became larger than life. The Groundlings audience saw it first. Every time Reubens brought Pee-wee on stage, people reacted differently. Some laughed hysterically, others stared in confusion, and a few whispered that they weren't sure if he was mocking them or inviting them into his world. That unpredictability was the secret. Pee-wee wasn't built to be a safe, traditional comedy character. He was built to stick in your mind, and that's exactly what Paul Reubens needed. He wasn't just creating a character, he was creating his revenge. Pee-wee Herman was proof that Reubens didn't need Saturday Night Live. He could build something entirely his own, and soon he would take the biggest gamble of his career, putting Pee-wee front and center in a midnight show that nobody expected would matter. But what happened on February 7th, 1981, inside a small Los Angeles theater didn't just matter, it changed comedy forever. It was February 7th, 1981. Most of Los Angeles was asleep. Midnight shows at the Groundlings Theater were usually a throwaway, something only the die-hard comedy fans or insomniacs bothered to attend. But Paul Reubens wasn't treating it like a late-night filler. To him, this was his shot. If Pee-wee Herman was going to work, it had to be here, in this cramped little theater on Melrose Avenue, with an audience that had no idea what they were about to see. The stage was set up to look like a bizarre parody of a children's TV show, complete with toys, tacky props, and an energy that felt both playful and slightly unhinged. When Reubens stepped out in the tight gray suit, red bow tie, and slicked back hair, the room went silent for a moment. Nobody knew what to make of him. Then, Pee-wee Herman opened his mouth, let out that squeaky voice, followed by the cackling laugh, and the place erupted. Some people laughed immediately. Others were confused. But one thing was certain. Nobody could look away. The show wasn't just comedy. It was an experience. Pee-wee flirted with the audience like a mischievous child, threw tantrums, sang songs badly on purpose, and turned every innocent moment into something strange and unforgettable. The midnight crowd, expecting a quirky sketch or two, instead found themselves immersed in an entire alternate reality built around this eccentric man-child. By the end of the night, people weren't just entertained, they were buzzing. They had witnessed something new, something they couldn't quite describe, but something they had to tell their friends about. Word of mouth spread like wildfire. Within weeks, Pee-wee Herman became the must-see act in Los Angeles. People lined up outside the Groundlings just to witness the chaos for themselves. Theaters that normally struggled to fill seats at midnight were suddenly packed. It wasn't just comedy fans showing up anymore. It was Hollywood insiders, producers, and celebrities who had heard whispers about this bizarre new character. And here's the thing that made Pee-wee explode. He didn't feel like a bit. He felt like a person. Paul Reubens never broke character on stage. Off stage, he still acted like Pee-wee when cameras were around. Interviews weren't Paul Reubens talking about Pee-wee. Interviews were Pee-wee Herman being Pee-wee Herman. The line between character and reality blurred until people weren't sure if Pee-wee was real or not. That mystery only fueled the obsession. But perhaps the most shocking twist was that Pee-wee Herman wasn't just connecting with comedy fans, he was attracting a cult. Audiences dressed like him. They mimicked his laugh. They quoted his lines. In a matter of weeks, Pee-wee Herman went from a late-night experiment to a cultural phenomenon. And the world was about to notice, because one of the most powerful platforms in the country, HBO, was watching. And they were about to give Pee-wee Herman the biggest stage of his life. The midnight shows at the Groundlings had turned into a phenomenon. What started as a quirky experiment was suddenly drawing Hollywood insiders, producers, and agents. The buzz was the same everywhere. You've got to see this Pee-wee Herman guy. Word spread so far, it landed on the desks of HBO executives. Soon, Paul Reubens had what most comedians dream of, a full-length special built entirely around Pee-wee. In 1981, the Pee-wee Herman Show premiered. For many viewers, it was their first glimpse of this strange man-child. Pee-wee strutted onto the screen with his squeaky voice, tight gray suit, and manic energy. Some called it madness. Others called it genius. But everyone agreed. They couldn't look away. The show wasn't just a filmed stage act. It was a bizarre TV spectacle. Puppets, talking furniture, awkward characters, and satire disguised as slapstick filled the screen. It looked like a children's show spiraling out of control. And that was the point. Pee-wee celebrated the innocence of kids' TV while mocking its absurdity, creating something familiar yet alien. It worked. The HBO special gave Pee-wee national exposure and transformed him from cult figure to rising star. Letters poured in, talk shows booked him. Not Paul Reubens, but Pee-wee Herman. He never broke character, deepening the illusion that Pee-wee wasn't a role, but a real person. Executives were nervous. Pee-wee was too odd, too unpredictable, nothing like the polished comics networks usually embraced. Could he last, or was this just a novelty? Reubens didn't care. He doubled down, refusing to explain, refusing to step out of character. The mystery became part of the magic. The special wasn't just a success, it was a signal. Pee-wee Herman had proven he could work beyond the groundlings, beyond Los Angeles, and connect with a national audience. Suddenly, Paul Reubens wasn't a rejected comedian anymore. He was one of the most talked about performers in Hollywood. And his next move wouldn't just cement Pee-wee's legacy, it would launch the career of one of Hollywood's most iconic directors. By 1985, Pee-wee Herman wasn't just a character, he was a phenomenon. Kids loved him, adults were fascinated by him, and Hollywood realized there might be something bigger here than sketch comedy or a late-night special. That's when Warner Brothers took a gamble and greenlit a full-length feature film starring Pee-wee Herman. But here's where the story takes an even stranger turn. The studio handed the reins of Pee-wee's big-screen debut to a young, unknown director who had never made a feature film before. His name? Tim Burton. Burton, fresh off his early work at Disney, was known for his dark, surreal style. On paper, pairing him with Pee-wee Herman seemed insane. But the collaboration clicked instantly. Pee-wee's Big Adventure became a perfect storm. Burton's oddball visual world collided with Paul Reubens' manic, unpredictable character, creating a movie that looked like nothing else in theaters. The plot was simple. Pee-wee sets off on a cross-country journey to find his beloved stolen bicycle, but the execution completely unhinged. The movie was packed with surreal dream sequences, bizarre characters, and moments that felt like fever dreams. From Pee-wee dancing on a bar, to tequila, to the terrifying Large Marge scene that scarred an entire generation of kids, the film blurred the line between comedy, nightmare, and fantasy. Audiences didn't know what hit them. Critics were baffled, unsure if it was genius or nonsense. But moviegoers loved it. On a budget of only $7 million, Pee-wee's Big Adventure pulled in more than $40 million at the box office. Overnight, Pee-wee Herman wasn't just a cult character, he was a box office star. And Tim Burton, thanks to the movie's success, launched a career that would soon give us classics like Beetlejuice, Batman, and Edward Scissorhands. Behind the scenes, the movie cemented something important. Pee-wee Herman wasn't just a one-note joke. He had the ability to carry a full-length story, to exist in an entire world built around his quirks. Reubens had proven that Pee-wee wasn't limited to late-night weirdness. He was a franchise waiting to happen. Hollywood suddenly saw Pee-wee Herman not just as a comedian's character, but as a brand. But the most shocking part? The movie's success wasn't even the peak, because just 1 year later, Pee-wee would conquer the one space nobody thought he could: Saturday morning television. And what happened there would etch Pee-wee Herman into cultural history forever. By 1986, Pee-wee Herman was everywhere. The movie had made him a box office hit, but Paul Reubens wanted more. He wanted Pee-wee in every living room, every week, so he pitched something outrageous: a full Saturday morning children's show built around Pee-wee Herman. Networks hesitated. He wasn't normal kids' TV, but CBS took the risk, and Pee-wee's Playhouse was born. What premiered on September 13, 1986, wasn't like anything on television. The set looked like a toy factory explosion: talking chairs, puppets, a genie in a box, colors that clashed on purpose. At first glance, it was a kids' show, but look closer and you saw the satire. Jokes landed on two levels: innocent for kids, sly and subversive for adults. Each week followed the same formula. Pee-wee welcomed viewers, played with his friends, and shouted when the secret word was revealed. Simple for kids, but the manic energy and surreal design made it irresistible for grown-ups too. It wasn't really children's TV, it wasn't adult comedy either. It was something in between, something entirely new. The talent involved only added to its cult status. A young Lawrence Fishburne played Cowboy Curtis, while future stars and cutting-edge designers filled the cast and crew. The puppetry, stop-motion, and handcrafted visuals made every episode feel like living art. And Paul Reubens, obsessively detail-oriented, kept Pee-wee's world consistent, wild, and unforgettable. Audiences responded instantly. Kids begged to wake up early, parents secretly tuned in, and the show racked up Emmy Awards. Pee-wee wasn't a passing fad. He was reshaping Saturday mornings. What made it so shocking was how completely it broke the rules. Saturday mornings were supposed to be safe. Superheroes, slapstick, toy commercials. Pee-wee's Playhouse tore that formula apart. It was weird, chaotic, and unapologetically original. But beneath the neon chaos lurked something deeper. Pee-wee wasn't just making kids laugh. He was feeding a growing cultural obsession. People started asking, who exactly was Pee-wee Herman? And where did Paul Reubens end and Pee-wee begin? That question would drive Pee-wee's rise even further, turning him from children's entertainer into something far more mysterious and legendary. On the surface, Pee-wee Herman was a children's icon, quirky, colorful, and endlessly entertaining. But beneath the laughter, there was a mystery that kept fans hooked. Who was Pee-wee really? A parody of TV hosts? A satire of childhood innocence? Or something stranger? Something darker? Paul Reubens only deepened the intrigue by refusing to separate himself from the character. Talk shows didn't interview Paul. They booked Pee-wee. Red carpets, magazine covers, even charity events. He never broke the act. To the public, Pee-wee wasn't fiction. He was real. Speculation exploded. Some thought Pee-wee was a symbol of arrested development, an adult trapped in childhood. Others saw him as satire of America's obsession with toys and consumerism. And many admitted there was always something slightly unsettling about him, that mix of innocence and edge that made Pee-wee unforgettable. The Playhouse itself fed the enigma. It was bursting with life, but its chaos carried a strange tension. Characters like Cherry and Jambi weren't just silly sidekicks. They felt surreal, even eerie. Kids saw fun, but adults sensed something deeper, maybe even critical of children's TV itself. Reubens never explained. He dodged every question, letting mystery do the work. Was Pee-wee satire or nonsense? Nobody knew, and that uncertainty made him legendary. Meanwhile, Pee-wee's influence spread everywhere. The laugh, the catchphrases, the bow tie. Kids copied him at school, adults quoted him at parties, and his face appeared on dolls, lunchboxes, even talking toys. But unlike Big Bird or Mr. Rogers, Pee-wee wasn't safe or comforting. He was an icon you couldn't pin down, and that was the magic. Pee-wee thrived because he was unpredictable, born from Reubens' refusal to play it safe. All of it, his fame, his mystery, his impact, traced back to one midnight show in 1981. But after Pee-wee conquered television, his story didn't end. What came next would cement his place as a legend far beyond Saturday mornings. It's almost surreal to think that everything began with a rejection letter from Saturday Night Live. What could have been the end of Paul Reubens' career instead became the spark for one of the most unique entertainment phenomena of the 1980s. That single midnight show on February 7th, 1981, didn't just introduce Pee-wee Herman, it launched a cultural revolution. Pee-wee went from cult curiosity to HBO headliner, from underground icon to blockbuster star. He turned a $7 million film into a $40 million hit, gave Tim Burton his first big break, and redefined what Saturday morning television could be with Pee-wee's Playhouse. More than that, Pee-wee blurred the line between children's entertainment and surreal art in a way no one else had done before. The legacy wasn't just about the laughs. Pee-wee Herman became a cultural touchstone because he represented something bigger. The power of creating your own lane when the world shuts you out. Reubens didn't get the traditional path. He didn't get SNL. But instead of chasing someone else's dream, he built his own. And in doing so, he created a character that would inspire, confuse, and delight generations. Even decades later, Pee-wee's influence is everywhere. You see it in the absurdist humor of shows like SpongeBob SquarePants and Adventure Time. You see it in the way comedians blur reality and performance, never breaking character. You even see it in how fans still debate Pee-wee's meaning. Was he just a silly man-child, or was he a mirror held up to society's own weirdness? The fact that we're still asking proves how powerful that character was, but the most striking part of the story is this: it almost never happened. If Paul Reubens had landed that spot on Saturday Night Live, Pee-wee Herman might have stayed an unfinished joke in a groundling sketch. Instead, failure forced him to take a risk, and that risk created a legend. Pee-wee Herman wasn't supposed to work. He was too strange, too eccentric, too unpredictable. And yet, that's exactly why he did. That midnight show in Los Angeles didn't just make Paul Reubens a star. It reminded the world that sometimes the greatest legends are born not from success, but from rejection. And that's why February 7th, 1981 wasn't just another late-night comedy show. It was the night a legend was born.